Ever find yourself scrolling through those news headlines and like each one just kind of makes your chest tighten up a little bit?
Oh, yeah.
Or someone makes like an offhand comment about, oh, the economy's going to tank, and suddenly you're picturing like a full-on dystopian future.
Yeah.
Yeah, today's deep dive is for anyone who's ever wondered why bad news seems to stick with us like that. Like, why are our brains drawn to the negative?
Right.
We're going deep into the psychology of prediction, especially why we seem wired to trust those negative predictions more than the positive ones.
Mm-hmm.
You sent over this excerpt called Unlocking the Power of Positive Manifestation, and it really digs into how our brains actually handle all this prediction stuff.
Yeah, it's like our brains almost have this like built-in negativity bias, right?
Totally.
Like a doom radar, just constantly scanning for what could go wrong.
It really does, doesn't it? It's like we're almost wired to zero in on that negative stuff.
Mm.
And even in this article, it talks about that. You remember that whole World War III panic a while back? Oh, yeah.
Just seemed like overnight everyone was bracing for the worst. Like, what is that?
Well, I mean, that's a perfect example of that negativity bias in action. And actually, from an evolutionary standpoint, it makes sense, right?
Okay.
So you think about our ancestors, the ones who were hyper aware of any potential threats, a saber-toothed tiger in the bushes, or another tribe coming to steal all our stuff, whatever it was.
Right.
Those are the ones who were more likely to survive, more likely to pass on their genes.
So we're like hardwired for this.
Kinda, yeah. It's like this ancient survival mechanism.
So it's like this ancient survival mechanism that's kind of backfiring on us in this modern world.
A little bit, yeah. We're still wired for danger, even if the dangers are a little more abstract now. It's not always a tiger. Sometimes it's a tweet about the stock market.
Right, exactly. Or like a news article about, oh, I don't know, a new variant or something.
Exactly. And it goes even beyond just like paying attention to those threats. So when we encounter negative information, our amygdala, that's like our brain's alarm system, right?
It fires up, releases a cocktail of stress hormones, things like cortisol, adrenaline.
Oh, great.
Puts us in that fight or flight mode. So it's basically priming us to react quickly to whatever this perceived danger is.
So it's not just in our heads, it's like a whole physiological thing that's happening.
Oh, absolutely.
No wonder those negative headlines can feel so like viscerally unsettling sometimes.
Yeah.
But okay, so if our brains are wired for survival, shouldn't we be just as receptive to positive predictions too?
You'd think so, right?
Like, wouldn't it be better from an evolutionary standpoint to get stoked about opportunities and rewards and stuff?
Right, you'd think. But our brains, they're surprisingly skeptical when it comes to the good news.
Really?
Yeah, and there are actually a few theories about why that is. One thought is that it's a form of self-protection.
Self-protection? How so?
Well, think about it. Getting our hopes up, getting really excited for something, only to be let down.
Ugh, the worst.
It's crushing, right? Disappointment, it really takes an emotional toll. Some researchers think our brains have learned to conserve energy by, like, not getting too optimistic.
Interesting. So it's like our brains are trying to save us from potential heartache by keeping our enthusiasm in check.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
It's like that saying, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst.
Ugh. That is a little pessimistic, though, isn't it?
It can feel that way.
Yeah.
And it definitely raises some interesting questions about how this negativity bias might be messing with our ability to, actually manifest some positive change in our lives.
And that brings us right to the core of the excerpt you sent over manifestation. No, I know, the word can be a little loaded.
For sure.
But I do think it's worth unpacking, especially when we're talking about how our brains seem wired for negativity.
Oh, absolutely. And what I thought was really interesting about this particular article was it really stresses the importance of action when it comes to this whole manifestation thing.
So it's not just about making a vision board and hoping for the best?
Not quite, no. It really emphasizes that manifestation is an active process.
Okay, so less wishing, more doing.
Exactly. It's about actually aligning your actions with what you want to create.
So if we're always stuck dwelling on the worst case scenario, always bracing for disaster, are we, in a way, manifesting that very scenario?
Whoa, that's a really good question. And that gets right to the heart of how our thoughts, our actions, they all influence what actually happens to us, right? Like, have you ever heard of a self-fulfilling prophecy?
Right, like we're almost willing it into existence by being so afraid of it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we get stuck in this loop. The more we focus on the negative, the more our brains are basically trained to look for and latch on to those negative experiences.
It's like we're filtering out all the good stuff and only seeing what we're afraid of.
Yeah, it's almost like we're trying to confirm what we already believe,
Yeah.
even if it's not doing us any favors.
Yeah. So how do we break free from that? The excerpt you sent, it talks about shifting our perspective. But how do we actually do that when it feels like our brains are wired for the doom and gloom?
Well, the first thing is just noticing it, right? Like catching ourselves when we start spiraling into those negative thought patterns.
Okay, so like hitting the pause button before we go too far.
Exactly. Like, are we constantly checking the news, looking for the next bad thing? Are we blowing every little setback out of proportion?
Turning a little molehill into a mountain.
Exactly. And once we kind of hit that pause button, then we can actually start to examine those thoughts.
Okay.
Are they actually true? Are they based in reality? Or are they just our negativity bias going a little haywire?
So we're getting more mindful, more aware of those thought patterns. What's next? We just think positive and cross our fingers.
Well, positive thinking, it definitely helps.
Right.
But it's not the whole picture.
Right.
Remember, this article we were talking about, it emphasized that action piece. It's about more than just thinking it. It's about aligning your actions with that positive intention.
Less dreaming, more doing.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't have to be these huge life-altering actions either. Sometimes it's just about setting those small, achievable goals that inch you closer to what you actually want.
I like that, small steps. Because sometimes this whole like manifest your dream life thing, it feels like, I don't know, kind of overwhelming, like it requires some mystical powers or something. But if we can break it down, make it feel doable.
It's way less intimidating, right?
Okay.
And it feels more empowering, too, because you're taking control, you're shaping your world. You're not just along for the ride, reacting to whatever comes at you.
This reminds me of that study I read about. It was with athletes, I think. And the ones who visualized winning were actually more likely to perform better.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't just about thinking happy thoughts. They were really picturing those actions, like mentally rehearsing what they needed to do to succeed.
That's a perfect example. It shows how powerful our minds can be, right? And it's not just for athletes either. Visualizing yourself getting that promotion or improving your relationships.
Right.
And then actually doing things that support that vision, it just massively increases your chances of it actually happening.
It makes sense if we're constantly feeding ourselves negativity. No wonder we feel powerless, stuck, like we're creating our own limitations.
Exactly. But the good news is it works both ways. If we can shift that focus,
Yeah.
Start feeding our minds more positive input and then take action, we can manifest a totally different reality.
It's like we become the authors of our own stories. But there's another side to this I'm curious about. What happens when that negativity bias like kicks into overdrive? When it crosses the line into unhealthy, fear-driven behavior? The excerpt, it talked about fear-based manifestation, but how do we know if we're in that danger zone?
That's such an important question because it's one thing to be aware, right? Like, yeah, there are risks and challenges in life, but it's totally different when fear starts calling the shots.
Right. It's like fear becomes the boss of you.
Exactly. It stops you from truly living. So how can we tell? Oh, well, one big red flag is when worry starts to take over your life.
Okay.
Like you're constantly ruminating about all the what ifs.
Right.
The anxiety is so bad it keeps you from enjoying the present moment or from going after your goals.
It's like that saying, worrying is like paying interest on a debt you might not even owe.
Yes.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we can't predict the future no matter how hard we try. So spending all our time and energy dwelling on what might go wrong, it just robs us of the joy of right now,
Totally. It's like we're trapping ourselves in this cage of anxiety, and that's like the exact opposite of what manifestation is supposed to be about, right?
Right. Manifestation, it's all about aligning yourself with what you want, what you're working towards, that vision you have.
Yeah.
And fear. Fear just keeps you small.
So how do we break free? Can we just like decide to be less afraid? Because that feels as useful as telling someone to calm down when they're already freaking out.
You're right. It's not about pretending the fear isn't there. I think it's more about like getting curious about it instead of letting it make decisions for us.
Oh, interesting. Like almost treat it like we do those negative thoughts. Pause, investigate.
Exactly. Often when we really look at our fears, they lose some of their power.
Right, like shining a light on them.
We realize, oh, this fear is based on something that happened years ago. It doesn't even apply anymore. Or it's based on something that might not even be true.
So we reframe those fears. see them through a new lens, like the source was saying, shift our perspective. Maybe it starts with how we see fear itself.
I love that.
Yeah.
Because fear, it's a human emotion. It's normal. It's there to protect us, but we get to choose if it controls us.
Right. So it's about listening to it, learning what it's trying to tell us.
Yeah, and then making a conscious choice about how to move forward.
So instead of that loop of what if something bad happens, it's more like, what if something amazing happens?
Now you're getting it.
Yeah.
That completely changes the whole vibe. It's like choosing to focus on what could go right, the potential, for good things, for growth, for joy.
It's like we're retraining our brains to look for the positive, just like our ancestors were trained to look for danger.
Exactly. And the more you do it, the stronger that pathway in your brain becomes. You're basically creating a self-fulfilling prophecy of positivity.
I love it. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into prediction, manifestation, all that good stuff, what's the one thing you hope our listeners walk away with?
For me, it always comes back to agency. Remembering that we're not powerless. Yeah, our brains have that negativity bias built in, but we also have the ability to be aware, to choose our thoughts, to take action. We can challenge fear, change our thinking, and create the future we want.
We're not just along for the ride, we're the ones in the driver's seat.
Exactly. It's a journey, for sure, figuring all this out.
Yeah.
But it's one worth taking.
It absolutely is. So listeners, as you go through your day, your week, your life, remember, what you focus on expands. Choose wisely. And hey, don't be afraid to embrace that power of possibility. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep those positive vibes flowing.